Games available at a console's launch are often difficult to figure out. There's always the games you had high hopes for that end up falling on their face. And then there are the games that no one expected to be good that end up delivering. Red Steel falls into both categories. At one time, it was heralded as the rebirth of the first-person action game, but after a couple lackluster showings, some of the glitz faded. Now that we've played the final version, we found that it falls somewhere in the middle. But is it worth your launch cash?
Oh my god! What happened to you?
It's rare that European developers try to create games based upon other cultures, but that's exactly what you have with Red Steel. This French-developed game takes you through the underbelly of the Japanese Yakuza underground as you attempt to rescue your fiancé from the nefarious gangsters. There are certainly points where it seems like the developers haven't exactly grasped the concept with both hands. The script comes off like it was written by someone attempting to translate Japanese into English with mixed results.
You remember when we first met? You told me that I was a spoiled brat.
Red Steel also shows some signs of being rushed out the door for launch. The story is primarily told through still images, and some real-time cinemas that may have been better left on the cutting room floor.
We must free them and rid ourselves of the woman who has insulted us.
With that said, the story eventually becomes gripping enough to get you through the course of the game as you uncover your future father-in-law's crooked past. You'll also attempt to convince 6 Yakuza clan leaders to rebel and join your side against Tokai, the punk who stole your girl. It's above average prose for a video game, but it certainly could have been shared in a much more dynamic, creative way.
This cannot be tolerated!
This is a game of two personalities. On one side, you have first-person shooting, and on the other, you have first-person swordplay. When and where you take on either is determined entirely by the game. It all seems a little jarring, to be honest, but it's explained by the honor points that are tallied throughout the game, where allowing foes to live will reward you with new abilities. On the gun side, you have the traditional armaments like machine guns, sniper rifles, pistols, grenades, and the like. While the weapons are typical, how you use them is not. A few hours into the game, you'll gain the ability to slow down time and mark specific body parts of enemies, and then bust off some caps in rapid succession. This is particularly effective for disarming foes, at which time you have the choice of finishing them off or letting them live. Sword fights occur fairly regularly, but the one-on-one affairs don't last long, making for a game that's about 80% gunplay and 20% hacking and slashing. When you do take up the sword, you're locked into combat and unable to roam freely, which makes sense considering the bad guys you'll be facing off against have no distractions. The single-player quest will keep you busy for a few days, and when you've exhausted all the content, there's a fairly fun multiplayer option to keep you going. There are just 3 modes total, including the typical deathmatch and team deathmatch. The best of the 3 is called Killer, where the Wii's remote speaker will give players particular instructions. The first to accomplish the objective is the winner. It's the only mode that actually makes use of the Wii's unique abilities, and it's a great deal of fun. Well, as long as you have a decently sized TV anyway. You can only play the multiplayer modes via split screen with up to 4 players, as there's no online or LAN support, which is a bummer. Technically speaking, Red Steel is all over the map. There are moments where the game looks like one of the more impressive Wii launch titles, with destructible environments and some impressive lighting. But other times, it looks like a game that was created for the GameCube, with blocky environments and blurry textures. While art is often a subjective thing, it's hard to fall in love with the characters in Red Steel. They look completely generic and lack any particular style, making almost all of them forgettable. The music, on the other hand, is anything but. Tom Salta has composed a rousing score for the game, using some impressive drumming to keep the sense of urgency at a premium. Anytime you introduce a control method as fresh as the Wii's, there's going to be a learning curve involved. Red Steel doesn't do a whole lot to help with this. When using guns, the Wii remote controls where you're looking, while the nunchuck attachment controls movement. It makes sense to try and mimic the industry standard PC setup, but the Wii remote doesn't provide enough sensitivity in Red Steel to turn around quickly enough. This causes a lot of the gun battles to deteriorate into finding a camping spot with a wide view of the environment, taking cover, and popping out to deliver some lead. Because of this, cover is definitely a bigger part of the game than we expected. You can tip over tables by giving the nunchuck an upward thrust and then hide behind them, but not for too long. Just like most of the objects in the game, the cover is destructible, so camping at one spot can mean doom. At least there's a rebounding health meter to fall back on. If you've taken too much damage, you can always run to safety and your health will go back to full. With the somewhat clunky controls, this can be easier said than done. One thing that counterbalances the brutish controls is the relatively stupid enemies you'll face throughout the game. They're more than happy to stand in the wide open and be bullet piñatas, yet they're absolute deadeyes who can seemingly shoot through any amount of cover or objects and land a shot. They'll occasionally take cover behind walls or tables, but more often than not, they'll dare you to master the controls. And it's not an easy dare either. The controls, by any standard, are extremely complex. The focus mode is enacted by thrusting the Wii Remote toward the TV, but to use normal zoom, you thrust it toward the TV while holding the A button. You swap through your weapons using the directional pad, and like the Halo series, you can only carry 2 at once, so you have to choose wisely. Toss in ducking, and you have a control scheme that will take even the most skilled player an hour or so to come to grips with. There's a slight aim assist built into the game that keeps you from having to be ultra perfect with the Wii Remote, and while there's no slider for aiming sensitivity, there are 3 different settings to choose from that can at least help you find your sweet spot. It's not all bad for the controls though. Tossing grenades is a good time, as you simply move the nunchuck in a throwing motion. You can even roll them along the ground by using an underhanded gesture, which is a lot more fun than you might think. Sadly, the sword play doesn't fare much better. There are 8 different motions that both the remote and nunchuck can pick up, but the game does a poor job of actually mimicking what you're doing. Instead, the movements trigger canned animations that can be difficult to read as far as their striking distance. Blocking with the nunchuck is handled a little better, as it actually replicates your movements, and deflecting a blow will leave your opponent stunned for a short period of time, giving you an opportunity to land some strikes. You'll also learn combos and new abilities as the game progresses, that will allow you to break an opponent's weapon or rain down with double-handed strikes. There's a bit of strategy to the sword fights, as there are separate meters for health and weapon strength. Deciding which one to chip away at can mean the difference between victory and defeat, as each enemy has different ratings for both. By now, your head is probably swimming trying to remember all the controls in Red Steel, and we don't blame you. Actually, playing the game is just as confusing at first. The control scheme is extremely ambitious and demanding, yet once you get a handle on it, it's easy to see the potential. Unfortunately, there's certainly room for improvement. While the controls eventually immerse you in Red Steel's world, neither the gunfighting nor swordplay feel polished, resulting in a disconnect between player and game. At least, there are constant save checkpoints to keep you from reaching the boiling point. The Wii was originally designed to be a system that would bring new players to gaming, but if games like Red Steel are any indication, things aren't necessarily more accessible. It's an ambitious game with controls to match, but once you get the hang of its ins and outs, you'll definitely have a good time blasting and slicing your way through the Yakuza. It's a game like no other, but it takes a great deal of patience before you're able to truly enjoy it. If you're a core gamer looking for a launch game, Red Steel is a nice choice. Casual players should give it a rent first, to see if their manual dexterity is up to the task.